My family said I failed at everything after leaving the military, constantly reminding me how my sister Nicole became a successful prosecutor while I couldn't even hold down a steady job. But when her police chief walked over and said, "Excuse me, you're the commissioner?" the entire family dinner went silent. What they didn't know was that the police department my sister worked so closely with reported directly to me. My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and for the past 4 years, my family has treated me like a living example of wasted potential. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The conversations at family gatherings always follow the same discouraging pattern. Hushed discussions about my inability to get my act together after military service. Growing up in Chicago, our father Miguel built a successful construction company from nothing, while our mother Rosa worked as a high school principal in one of the city's most challenging districts. The Rodriguez family valued hard work, education, and community service above everything else. My younger sister Nicole embodied these principles perfectly. She graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern Law School, passed the Illinois bar exam on her first attempt, and quickly rose through the ranks of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to become one of Chicago's most prominent prosecutors. I chose military service instead. After high school, I enlisted in the Army Military Police and spent 8 years serving as a criminal investigator, including deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, where I handled complex cases involving military personnel, civilian contractors, and international law enforcement coordination. I investigated everything from theft and assault to terrorism-related incidents, managed multi-jurisdictional operations, and earned commendations for my work on cases that required diplomatic sensitivity and cross-cultural communication skills. When I returned to civilian life in 2020, Nicole was already making headlines throughout Chicago's legal community. Her successful prosecution of high-profile corruption cases had earned her recognition from the Illinois State Bar Association, speaking invitations at law enforcement conferences, and widespread speculation that she was being considered for federal prosecutor positions. She owned a Lincoln Park condo, drove a BMW, and attended legal symposiums where she networked with judges, federal agents, and political leaders. Meanwhile, I discovered that civilian employers struggled to understand military police experience in terms they could value. Job interviews became exercises in translation as I tried to explain how investigating complex criminal cases in combat environments related to civilian law enforcement or corporate security roles. Hiring managers saw my military background as interesting but foreign, lacking the civilian police academy training or corporate investigation experience they prioritized. I took whatever work I could find: security supervisor at shopping centers, private investigator for insurance fraud cases, background check specialist for a Chicago staffing company. Each position felt like a dramatic step down, from investigating serious crimes that affected international security and military readiness. Family dinners became increasingly uncomfortable exhibitions of Nicole's professional achievements. She would update everyone on her latest courtroom victories, high-profile cases she was prosecuting, and invitations to speak at national legal conferences. When conversations reluctantly turned to me, Rosa would offer diplomatic explanations. Carmen is still finding her niche in civilian law enforcement, or she's exploring different opportunities in security work. The unspoken message was unmistakable: the successful prosecutor versus the struggling former soldier. Nicole occasionally offered assistance, suggesting entry-level positions with law enforcement agencies where she had professional relationships. Administrative roles, evidence processing, basic patrol positions that required none of the complex investigative skills, cross-jurisdictional coordination, or leadership capabilities I'd developed commanding military police operations in hostile environments. I declined these offers politely, understanding that accepting would confirm their narrative about my civilian limitations. The family story solidified over time. Nicole was the legal mind who'd leveraged her education into prosecutorial success and community recognition. I was the older sister who'd served honorably but couldn't translate military experience into meaningful civilian achievement. They weren't intentionally cruel, just quietly disappointed that my service hadn't prepared me for the sophisticated professional world they understood and respected. What none of them knew was that I hadn't abandoned my commitment to justice and public safety. I'd simply found a uniform that didn't require their recognition or approval. The moment that changed everything happened at Nicole's promotion celebration in November 2020. The Cook County State's attorney had just appointed her as chief deputy prosecutor for major crimes, making her one of the youngest people in Illinois history to reach that level of prosecutorial authority. The celebration was held at the Chicago Athletic Association, with over 200 guests including judges, police commanders, federal prosecutors, and prominent figures from Chicago's legal and political communities. I'd considered skipping the event entirely. These legal establishment gatherings made me feel like an outsider in my discount store suit, making small talk while everyone else discussed cases and career opportunities I couldn't meaningfully contribute to. But Rosa had insisted on family support for such a significant milestone, and Nicole had specifically invited me, saying my military background would be inspiring to the law enforcement officials attending. The evening unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Nicole commanded the room with natural authority, accepting congratulations from an endless stream of colleagues who discussed courtroom strategies, upcoming prosecutions, and the complex challenges of managing Chicago's most serious criminal cases. I positioned myself near the appetizer table, watching my sister navigate conversations with police superintendents and federal agents, with the same confidence I'd once felt briefing commanding officers on criminal investigations. That's when I overheard the conversation that destroyed my faith in everything I'd believed about family support and professional respect. Nicole was speaking with Detective Commander Patricia Walsh and Assistant U.S. Attorney James Morrison near the bar, discussing the ongoing challenges of prosecuting complex criminal cases in Cook County. The conversation had clearly been ongoing for some time, and their professional camaraderie had created an atmosphere of candid discussion. The biggest frustration, Nicole was explaining, is working with investigators who don't understand the sophisticated evidence requirements for federal prosecutions. Too many people think basic military police experience qualifies them for complex civilian criminal investigation work. Detective Commander Walsh nodded knowingly. We see that constantly. Veterans apply for detective positions assuming their military background automatically translates to civilian police competence. But the skill sets are completely different. Exactly, Nicole continued, her voice gaining confidence. My sister Carmen is a perfect example of this problem. She spent years in military police, but struggles to find meaningful civilian law enforcement employment because military experience doesn't actually prepare you for the nuanced requirements of civilian criminal justice. James Morrison leaned in with interest. It must be frustrating for your family when veterans can't adapt their experience effectively. Nicole's response was swift and matter-of-fact. Carmen keeps applying for investigative positions she's simply not qualified for. She has some basic security work now, but she doesn't understand that military police operations bear little resemblance to the complex legal and procedural requirements of civilian criminal investigation. Detective Commander Walsh raised her glass. To the challenges of educating applicants about the real qualifications required for serious law enforcement work. They clinked glasses, laughing about what they saw as the fundamental incompetence of military personnel in civilian criminal justice contexts. I stood frozen behind a decorative column, listening to my sister use my career struggles as evidence for why military police experience was inadequate preparation for civilian law enforcement leadership. I slipped outside to the building's terrace, needing fresh air and space to process this betrayal. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Deputy Chief Carmen Martinez from the Chicago Police Department. We received your application through our Federal Liaison Program and would like to discuss an immediate opportunity. I stared at that message, confused because I hadn't submitted any applications to the Chicago Police Department through federal programs I'd never heard of. But something about the timing felt significant, like the universe was offering me an alternative path just when I needed it most. The meeting with Deputy Chief Carmen Martinez took place 4 days after Nicole's promotion celebration. I sat in a small conference room at Chicago Police Headquarters, still confused about why a senior police official wanted to discuss opportunities I'd never applied for. Ms. Rodriguez, Deputy Chief Martinez said as she entered with a thick folder, thank you for coming in. I'm the head of Special Operations and Federal Liaison for CPD, and your background has come to our attention through some very interesting channels. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. Ma'am, I need to be honest. I haven't submitted any applications to the Chicago Police Department. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There might be some confusion about my qualifications or interest. She smiled knowingly as she opened the folder. Actually, there's no confusion. 3 years ago, you completed an advanced training program at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers in Georgia. Does that ring a bell? My memory snapped into focus. During my final year in the Army, I'd participated in an interagency criminal investigation program designed to prepare military police for civilian law enforcement transitions. The training covered federal criminal procedures, multi-jurisdictional coordination, and advanced investigative techniques. I'd written a comprehensive analysis of urban crime prevention strategies as my capstone project. I remember that program, I said slowly, but it was just professional development training. I never expected anyone to follow up on it. Deputy Chief Martinez spread several documents across the table. Ms. Rodriguez, your analysis wasn't just filed away, it was implemented. The crime prevention strategies you outlined have been adapted by police departments in 6 major cities, with measurable reductions in violent crime rates. I stared at the documents, recognizing my own writing from 3 years earlier but seeing implementation reports, statistical analyses, and program evaluations I'd never created. Your training instructors were so impressed with your work that they recommended you for a federal fast-track program, she continued. You've been provisionally certified for senior law enforcement positions through a Department of Justice initiative that most people don't even know exists. She handed me credentials I'd never seen before. Carmen Rodriguez, Federal Law Enforcement Liaison, certified for command-level positions. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely audible. I work in private security. I can't even get interviews for basic detective positions. Deputy Chief Martinez studied me carefully. Ms. Rodriguez, the federal certification program identified you as having exceptional potential for law enforcement leadership. The question is whether you're ready to use those qualifications. She explained that Chicago was participating in a pilot program to address police reform and community relations through innovative leadership approaches. They needed someone with military investigative experience, federal training, and the ability to work across multiple jurisdictions and agencies. The position would be challenging, she said. You'd be coordinating between federal agencies, state prosecutors, and local police departments on cases involving organized crime, public corruption, and terrorism-related investigations. The opportunity was everything I'd never dared to imagine. Leading complex criminal investigations, implementing strategic crime prevention initiatives, and working at the intersection of federal and local law enforcement. I accepted the position that afternoon, signing paperwork that would remain classified for the first 6 months while I completed additional specialized training and security clearance upgrades. My family knew none of this. When they asked about my new security job, I described it vaguely as, quote, consulting work with law enforcement agencies. Nicole would nod politely before discussing her own prosecutorial challenges, including her frustrations with inadequately trained investigators who couldn't meet the evidence standards required for successful prosecutions. The irony was perfect. While Nicole complained about working with incompetent law enforcement personnel, I was quietly becoming one of the most highly trained criminal investigators in the entire region. But this was only the beginning. Deputy Chief Martinez had mentioned that my federal certifications opened doors to opportunities that most people couldn't even imagine, and I was about to discover exactly what that meant. While I was quietly ascending through federal law enforcement leadership programs, Nicole's career continued its highly visible trajectory through Chicago's legal establishment. By spring 2021, she'd successfully prosecuted 3 major corruption cases that had generated statewide media coverage and established her as one of Illinois' most prominent anti-corruption prosecutors. Her work had attracted attention from the U.S. Attorney's Office, leading to speculation about federal appointment opportunities. Family gatherings became elaborate showcases of Nicole's expanding influence throughout Chicago's legal and political communities. At Easter dinner, Miguel proudly displayed newspaper clippings featuring Nicole's courtroom victories and television interviews discussing prosecutorial strategy. Rosa showed relatives photos from legal conferences where Nicole presented alongside federal prosecutors and attended networking events with Illinois Supreme Court justices. During these celebrations, I maintained my familiar background position, offering congratulations while deflecting questions about my own professional activities. "Carmen's doing specialized security consulting now," Rosa would explain to curious relatives, "working with law enforcement agencies on technical projects." The description was technically accurate but completely missed the scope and level of my actual responsibilities. What my family couldn't see was the extraordinary transformation happening in my daily professional life. My role with the Federal Liaison Program had evolved far beyond basic consulting. I was now leading multi-agency task forces investigating organized crime, coordinating with FBI field offices on terrorism prevention initiatives, and developing strategic intelligence assessments that influenced law enforcement policy at the national level. The federal certification program had connected me with an elite network of law enforcement professionals working on the most complex and sensitive criminal cases in the country. My military police background, combined with advanced federal training, had positioned me as an expert in cross-jurisdictional criminal investigation and international law enforcement coordination. The work was challenging and deeply meaningful. I was leading investigations into human trafficking networks, coordinating counterterrorism operations with federal agencies, and developing community policing strategies that were being adopted by police departments across the Midwest. Every case I worked on had direct impact on public safety and national security. The irony was particularly sharp during Nicole's discussions about her prosecutorial challenges and law enforcement coordination frustrations. At Mother's Day brunch, she complained extensively about working with inadequately trained investigators who couldn't develop evidence to the standards required for successful federal prosecutions. "The biggest problem," Nicole explained to the gathered family, "is that most local law enforcement personnel lack the sophisticated training necessary for complex criminal cases. They understand basic police work, but they can't handle the multi-jurisdictional coordination and federal evidence requirements that serious prosecutions demand." Miguel nodded approvingly at Nicole's analytical assessment, while I sat there knowing that the federal task forces under my leadership were producing some of the highest quality criminal evidence packages in the entire region. "Maybe the problem isn't training quality," I suggested carefully, "but communication between prosecutors and the federal liaison programs that coordinate complex investigations." Nicole dismissed the idea with characteristic confidence. "Carmen, these are sophisticated legal and procedural challenges that require years of specialized education and experience. Most law enforcement personnel, even those with military backgrounds, simply don't have the qualifications necessary for federal-level criminal investigation work." Rosa smiled approvingly at Nicole's professional expertise, while I realized that my sister was unknowingly criticizing the exact type of work I was leading every day. That afternoon, Deputy Chief Martinez texted me about a career-defining opportunity. "Carmen, the mayor's office wants to discuss your candidacy for a senior appointment. This could change everything. Are you ready for the next level?" I stared at that message, understanding that my family's assumptions about my limitations were about to be challenged in the most public way possible. By summer 2021, my role in federal law enforcement had expanded far beyond what I'd ever imagined possible during that initial meeting with Deputy Chief Martinez. The mayor's office appointment she'd mentioned turned out to be selection for the newly created position of Police Commissioner for Special Operations, a role that would oversee all federal coordination, anti-terrorism initiatives, and major crimes investigations for the entire Chicago metropolitan area. The appointment process was conducted in complete secrecy due to the sensitive nature of the position. I underwent extensive background investigations, psychological evaluations, and security clearance upgrades that took 3 months to complete. The role required Senate confirmation at the federal level because of its coordination responsibilities with national security agencies. What started as consulting work had evolved into one of the most influential law enforcement positions in the Midwest. As commissioner, I would have authority over multi-state investigations, direct communication with federal agency directors, and responsibility for strategic coordination between local police departments and national security organizations. The network of professionals I was working with included FBI assistant directors, DEA regional commanders, and Homeland Security deputy secretaries. My military police background, combined with federal training and demonstrated success leading complex investigations, had positioned me as a bridge between local law enforcement and federal agencies that traditionally operated independently. My weekly schedule transformed completely. Mondays were dedicated to intelligence briefings with federal agencies about emerging threats to Chicago and the broader region. Tuesdays involved strategic planning meetings with police chiefs from surrounding counties, coordinating resources and information sharing protocols. Wednesdays were reserved for oversight of ongoing major crimes investigations, including organized crime, public corruption, and terrorism prevention operations. The most challenging work happened on Thursdays, when I conducted classified briefings for local political leaders about security threats and law enforcement initiatives that couldn't be discussed publicly. These sessions required translating complex federal intelligence into actionable information for mayors, county executives, and state legislators who needed to understand threats without compromising ongoing operations. But the most rewarding aspect was seeing the practical impact of improved coordination between agencies that had previously worked in isolation. Cases that might have taken years to develop were being resolved in months because federal and local investigators were finally sharing information effectively and coordinating their efforts strategically. The position also connected me with other veterans who were leading similar coordination efforts in major cities across the country. Through secure communication networks, we shared best practices, coordinated multi-city investigations, and developed standardized protocols that were improving law enforcement effectiveness nationally. Within 6 months, I was serving on federal advisory committees that influenced Department of Justice policy, consulting with congressional committees about law enforcement reform legislation, and advising other cities about establishing their own federal coordination programs. The compensation and benefits were substantial, far exceeding Nicole's prosecutor salary, but more importantly, I was working on cases that directly protected national security and public safety on a scale I'd never experienced even during military service. The irony was perfect. While Nicole struggled with prosecuting complex cases because of inadequate law enforcement coordination, I was quietly directing the exact federal liaison programs that were producing the highest quality criminal evidence packages in the region. At family gatherings, I continued describing my work vaguely as consulting on law enforcement coordination projects, while my family assumed I was earning modest fees for basic administrative support. They had no idea I was increasingly being recognized as one of the most effective law enforcement coordinators in the entire country. The transformation from failed veteran to federal law enforcement leader was complete, but my family's recognition of that success was about to become unavoidably public. The moment that made everything devastatingly personal happened at Nicole's wedding shower in August 2022. She was marrying Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen, and the celebration was held at the Peninsula Chicago, with over 100 guests representing the city's legal and law enforcement elite. The guest list included federal judges, police superintendents, FBI field office leaders, and prominent figures from both prosecutorial and defense bars. I'd planned to make a brief appearance and leave early, as had become my strategy for avoiding extended conversations about career prospects and professional achievements. But as I was preparing to slip away after the gift opening ceremony, I overheard a conversation that shattered my remaining faith in family loyalty. Nicole was speaking with a group of her prosecutorial colleagues near the hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows, discussing the ongoing challenges of working with law enforcement agencies that couldn't meet federal evidence standards. The champagne had clearly loosened their usual professional discretion, and their voices carried more authority than usual. The most frustrating part of my job, Nicole was explaining to Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos, is dealing with local law enforcement personnel who think they're qualified for federal-level criminal investigation work when they clearly lack the necessary training and expertise. Maria nodded sympathetically. We see this constantly. Veterans especially seem to think military police experience automatically translates to civilian federal law enforcement competence, but the skill sets are completely different. Exactly, Nicole continued, her voice gaining momentum as she found a sympathetic audience. My sister Carmen is a perfect example of this problem. She's been doing some consulting work with police departments, but she completely overestimates her qualifications for serious law enforcement coordination. Detective Superintendent Patricia Walsh, whom I recognized from several federal coordination meetings, leaned in with interest. What kind of consulting work? Nicole laughed dismissively. Nothing significant. Basic security consulting, maybe some training coordination. Carmen talks about federal liaison work like it's some important position, but it's probably just administrative support for actual investigators who have real qualifications. The group chuckled knowingly, and Nicole continued with increasing confidence. The problem is that Carmen doesn't understand how complex federal criminal investigation actually is. She thinks her military background gives her insights into law enforcement strategy, but she's never worked a real federal case or coordinated with actual federal agencies. Maria raised her champagne glass. To the challenges of managing family members who don't understand the sophisticated requirements of federal prosecution work. They clinked glasses, laughing about what they saw as my naive assumptions about law enforcement complexity. I stood frozen behind a decorative plant, listening to my sister systematically dismiss my capabilities while demonstrating her complete ignorance of what I actually did for a living. The betrayal was deeper than personal humiliation. Nicole wasn't just mocking my career. She was coaching federal prosecutors and police officials to view veteran law enforcement experience as inherently inadequate. She was actively undermining respect for military police qualifications among the exact people I worked with every day. What made the moment even more painful was watching Detective Superintendent Walsh nod approvingly at Nicole's assessment. Walsh reported directly to me in the federal coordination structure, but she had no idea that the unqualified sister Nicole was describing was actually her immediate supervisor in multi-jurisdictional operations. I slipped outside to the hotel's terrace, needing air and space to process this betrayal. My phone buzzed with a message from Deputy Chief Martinez. Carmen, the Senate just confirmed your appointment. Official announcement is Monday morning. Congratulations, Commissioner Rodriguez. I stared at that message, understanding that Nicole's careful management of my limitations was about to be exposed in the most public way possible. The sister she'd dismissed as professionally incompetent was about to be officially recognized as the highest-ranking law enforcement coordinator in the entire region. The official announcement of my appointment as police commissioner for special operations was scheduled for a Tuesday morning press conference at Chicago City Hall. But the family dinner that would change everything happened 2 days earlier, on a Sunday evening at Rosa and Miguel's house in Pilsen. The dinner was supposed to be a casual family gathering to celebrate Nicole's recent marriage to David Chen, but Nicole had invited Police Chief Robert Sullivan, who was David's longtime friend, and someone she'd worked closely with on several high-profile prosecutions. Chief Sullivan was well regarded throughout Chicago's law enforcement community and had recently been mentioned as a candidate for federal law enforcement positions. I arrived at my parents' house directly from a classified briefing at the FBI field office, where I'd been coordinating intelligence about a multi-state organized crime investigation. I was exhausted but maintaining the same low profile I'd cultivated for months, letting my family assume I was still struggling with basic consulting work. The evening began predictably. Nicole and David dominated conversation with stories about their honeymoon in Italy, their new Lincoln Park townhouse, and Nicole's expanding influence in federal prosecution circles. Chief Sullivan contributed enthusiastically, sharing insights about police department modernization efforts and his collaboration with federal agencies on major crimes investigations. Speaking of federal coordination, Nicole said as Rosa served dessert, Robert, you've been working on those initiatives to improve cooperation between local police and federal prosecutors. How's that progressing? Chief Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. It's been challenging, honestly. We're trying to implement better coordination protocols, but it requires finding personnel who understand both local policing and federal investigation procedures. The skill set is rare. David leaned forward with interest. What about the federal liaison programs I've heard about? Aren't there specialists who handle that kind of coordination? There are, Chief Sullivan replied, but most of them are administrative coordinators rather than actual investigators. We need someone with real operational experience who can bridge the gap between federal requirements and local capabilities. Nicole seized the opportunity to demonstrate her expertise. That's exactly the problem Carmen doesn't understand about her consulting work. She thinks military police experience qualifies her for federal law enforcement coordination, but real federal work requires sophisticated understanding of legal procedures and interagency protocols. I continued eating my flan, saying nothing while listening to them discuss the limitations of veteran qualifications in federal law enforcement contexts. The challenge, Chief Sullivan continued, is finding someone with both operational credibility and the authority to make decisions that federal agencies will respect. Most coordinators are just liaisons, without real power to influence investigations. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Federal Operations Center, and I knew I couldn't ignore a call from the coordination hub that managed multi-state law enforcement emergencies. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into the hallway. "I need to take this." "Commissioner Rodriguez," the duty officer said, "we have a developing situation that requires your immediate authorization. A multi-jurisdictional task force needs approval to proceed with coordinated arrests across 3 states. I provided the necessary approvals and returned to the dining room, where the conversation about federal coordination had continued. Chief Sullivan was explaining the complexity of multi-state operations when he noticed me re-entering. "Carmen, I hope that wasn't work calling on Sunday evening," he said politely. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed with what was clearly an urgent message. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted completely. "I'm sorry," he said, looking directly at me, with a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition. "I just received a notification about a federal operation that was just authorized by—" He paused, checking his phone again. "Commissioner Rodriguez." The silence that followed was absolute. Nicole's fork stopped midway to her mouth. David looked between Chief Sullivan and me with growing bewilderment. Chief Sullivan stood slowly, his expression moving from confusion to something approaching shock. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're the commissioner?" The silence that followed Chief Sullivan's question lasted exactly 14 seconds. I counted them while watching my family's faces transform from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. Then chaos erupted in carefully controlled waves of shocked questions and desperate attempts to understand what they'd just witnessed. Chief Sullivan recovered first, his police training helping him process unexpected situations. "Commissioner Rodriguez, I had no idea you were. I mean, we've been working under your coordination for months, but I never connected." He paused, clearly struggling to reconcile the federal law enforcement leader he knew professionally with the struggling sister he'd heard about all evening. "Carmen," Nicole said, her voice tight with something between confusion and horror. "What is Robert talking about? What commissioner position?" I looked around the dining room, where I'd endured years of sympathetic explanations about my career limitations and gentle suggestions about accepting realistic employment expectations. "I'm the police commissioner for special operations," I said calmly, noting how David had gone completely pale. "I coordinate federal law enforcement activities for the entire Chicago metropolitan area, including oversight of multi-state investigations and anti-terrorism operations." Miguel dropped his coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the hardwood floor. "Carmen, what are you saying? You work in security consulting." Chief Sullivan pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be organizational charts. "Commissioner Rodriguez oversees all federal coordination for major crimes, organized crime investigations, and terrorism prevention. She has authority over—" He looked up at me with something approaching awe. "You outrank me. You outrank most of the law enforcement leadership in Illinois." Rosa moved toward the broken coffee cup, her nurse's training activated by the need to clean up, but her hands were shaking too badly to be effective. "I don't understand what's happening here." Nicole finally found her voice, though it emerged as barely a whisper. "But you couldn't even get interviews for basic detective positions. You were struggling with employment applications." "No, Nicole," I replied, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed commanding federal task forces. I wasn't struggling with employment. I was being selective about opportunities that matched my federal qualifications and security clearance level. David, who'd been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly understood the implications. Wait, you're the federal coordinator we've been working with on the corruption cases? The one who's been providing the multi-jurisdictional intelligence that made our prosecutions possible? I nodded once, watching as the realization crashed over him like a wave. Chief Sullivan was now scrolling through what appeared to be federal communication logs. Commissioner, I need to apologize. If I'd known you were here tonight, I would have briefed you on the Morrison investigation developments and the federal task force recommendations for next week's operations. We can discuss that tomorrow, I said calmly. Tonight is family time. Nicole looked like she might faint. Carmen, how long have you been in this position? Why didn't you tell us? I've been building toward this role for 2 years, I explained. And I didn't tell you because every time I tried to discuss my law enforcement work, you dismissed it as, quote, basic security consulting. Or explained to other people how military experience didn't qualify veterans for serious federal law enforcement positions. Rosa finally managed to speak, though her voice was barely audible. Maisha, are you saying you've been one of the most important law enforcement officials in Chicago this entire time? Miguel slumped into his chair, staring at me like I'd revealed myself to be someone completely different from the daughter he thought he knew. The investigation you authorized tonight, Chief Sullivan said, checking his phone again, involves coordinated arrests in Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. That's a massive operation. The daughter they'd written off as professionally incompetent had just been revealed as one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the Midwest. 6 weeks after the shocking family dinner revelation, Nicole called me for the first time since that Sunday evening. Her voice carried none of the prosecutorial confidence I'd grown accustomed to hearing throughout our lives. Instead, she sounded uncertain, almost vulnerable. Carmen, could we meet for coffee? Just the two of us. I need to understand some things that I clearly got completely wrong. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in the Loop. Neutral territory where neither of us had professional associations that might complicate our conversation. When I arrived, Nicole was already seated in a corner booth, staring at a newspaper article about my recent testimony before Congress on federal law enforcement coordination reforms. I've been reading everything I can find about your work, she said as I sat down across from her. The federal task force successes, the anti-terrorism coordination improvements, the organized crime prosecutions that relied on your intelligence coordination. Carmen, what you've accomplished isn't just impressive, it's extraordinary. She paused, struggling with emotions I'd rarely seen her display. I spent 3 years telling colleagues that you were overestimating your qualifications for federal law enforcement work. I explained to David's friends that military police experience didn't prepare you for sophisticated criminal investigation coordination. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. While Nicole had been coaching federal prosecutors about the limitations of veteran law enforcement capabilities, I'd been directing the exact coordination programs that were producing their most successful prosecutions. I researched the federal coordination structure after that dinner, Nicole continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Carmen, you don't just coordinate with federal agencies. You have oversight authority for multi-state investigations that affect national security. You outrank police chiefs, FBI field coordinators, and federal prosecutors. Over the following months, something fundamental shifted in our family dynamics. The Sunday dinners that had once showcased Nicole's prosecutorial achievements became genuine conversations about our respective contributions to criminal justice and public safety. Rosa began asking detailed questions about federal law enforcement procedures, genuinely curious about coordination challenges she'd never considered relevant. Miguel's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. He started reading federal law enforcement publications and asking informed questions about multi-jurisdictional investigation complexities. I want to understand what my daughter actually does, he told me during one of our private conversations. I want to be proud of the right things. The broader recognition extended far beyond family acknowledgement. My congressional testimony had positioned me as a leading voice on federal coordination reform, generating invitations to speak at international law enforcement conferences and consult with foreign governments developing their own interagency coordination programs. Most importantly, I began receiving communications from other veterans who were struggling with civilian law enforcement career transitions. My story had become proof that military police experience could translate into extraordinary federal law enforcement success, but only when applied in contexts that recognized and leveraged that expertise appropriately. Nicole's own career evolved in unexpected directions. The humbling experience of discovering her assumptions were wrong led her to specialize in prosecuting cases that required complex federal coordination. She developed new approaches that recognized the strategic value of military law enforcement experience, rather than treating it as a limitation to overcome. I spent years thinking that successful prosecution required dismissing military investigation methods as inadequate, she told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. Now I understand that the most successful federal cases are the ones that leverage military operational expertise, rather than ignoring it. 4 months after the revelation, Nicole approached me with a proposal that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Carmen, David and I want to develop a federal prosecution program that specifically incorporates veteran investigators with your background, not as entry-level personnel, but as senior coordinators who can bridge military operational experience with federal legal requirements. For the first time in our adult lives, Nicole was asking for my professional expertise, rather than offering me entry-level assistance. The struggling veteran's sister had become the law enforcement leader whose methods other agencies wanted to adopt. Today, I sit in my office at the Federal Law Enforcement Coordination Center in downtown Chicago, overlooking Lake Michigan and leading one of the most successful interagency programs in American law enforcement history. The nameplate on my desk reads, Commissioner Carmen Rodriguez, but the framed commendation beside it represents something more meaningful. Recognition from the Department of Justice for reducing organized crime activity in the Midwest by 43% through improved federal coordination. The federal coordination programs I developed have been implemented in 26 major cities nationwide, fundamentally changing how local police departments work with federal agencies on complex criminal investigations. The operational frameworks we created have influenced national policy, improved conviction rates for serious crimes, and demonstrated that military law enforcement experience provides essential capabilities for civilian federal coordination. My congressional testimony led to the passage of the Federal Law Enforcement Coordination Act, which established standardized protocols for multi-jurisdictional investigations and created career pathways for veterans transitioning into civilian law enforcement leadership roles. The legislation has generated thousands of meaningful employment opportunities for former military police personnel at federal, state, and local levels. The most rewarding aspect of this work is seeing measurable improvements in public safety outcomes. The anti-terrorism prevention programs we coordinate have disrupted multiple plots against civilian targets. Our organized crime task forces have dismantled networks that were operating across state lines with impunity. The federal coordination protocols we established have shortened investigation timelines from years to months, while improving evidence quality and conviction rates. Nicole's transformation has been equally remarkable. Her collaboration with our federal programs has made her one of the most effective prosecutors in Illinois, specializing in cases that require complex coordination between multiple agencies and jurisdictions. She's become a national advocate for incorporating veteran law enforcement expertise into federal prosecution strategies. I used to think successful prosecution meant working around the limitations of military-trained investigators, she told me recently, while reviewing Joint Task Force results. Now I understand that the most successful federal cases are the ones that leverage military operational excellence as a strategic advantage. Our family dinners have transformed into strategic planning sessions where Nicole and I discuss ways to improve coordination between prosecutors and federal law enforcement coordinators. Rosa contributes insights from her education background, helping us develop training programs that prepare civilian personnel to work effectively with veteran law enforcement leaders. The broader impact extends far beyond Chicago or even federal law enforcement. The coordination methodologies I developed have influenced international law enforcement cooperation, improved information sharing between allied nations' security agencies, and demonstrated that American military expertise provides competitive advantages in addressing global criminal threats. Last month, I received a letter from a former Army military police officer who used our career transition programs to become a federal task force coordinator in Denver. Her success story isn't unique. Our programs have supported hundreds of veterans in achieving law enforcement leadership positions where their expertise creates genuine value rather than filling diversity requirements. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy is the cultural change we've created around veteran law enforcement capabilities. Police departments that once viewed military experience as irrelevant now compete to recruit veteran personnel for leadership positions, understanding that military law enforcement expertise provides strategic advantages in complex criminal investigations. My story isn't really about family vindication or personal triumph over assumptions. It's about proving that military police experience provides extraordinary preparation for civilian law enforcement leadership, but only when society recognizes and leverages that preparation effectively, rather than treating it as a limitation to overcome. The sister they said failed had actually been protecting them all along, one federal coordination success at a time. Sometimes, the most powerful way to change perceptions isn't through arguments, but through results that speak louder than any dismissive assumptions ever could. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.